So while we're waiting, actually, why don't I start by telling you guys a little bit about Kaitlin? So our special guest today is the co-founder and CEO of Hey Jane, which is a digital women's health clinic providing medication abortion care, which she's going to tell us more about in our conversation today. I have a lot of questions, and I'm sure you guys do too, so send them in. But prior to Hey Jane, Kaitlin actually led strategic initiatives for Uber in Kenya, South Africa, Sweden, and the US. She holds an MBA from Harvard Business School, and she's passionate about using technology to increase healthcare access to historically underserved populations. So it is such a huge honor to have her here with us today. And as soon as we get her in, we're going to start the chat. There we go. Hello.
Hello, how's it going?
Hi. Oh, 1 second, it's buffering. I might need a second. There you are. Hi.
There we go. How are you?
I'm so excited to be talking to you. I mean, thank you so much for doing this. I know you must be so busy, and I'm so excited for this conversation. I have so many questions.
Super excited as well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just gave people a little bit of background on you. I don't know if you heard, but why don't you start by just kind of introducing yourself to everyone and tell us a little bit about why you started Hey Jane.
Yeah, definitely. So hi everyone, I'm Kaitlin, originally from Miami. I started Hey Jane, started Hey Jane a little over a year ago, watching in the news as Missouri, where I went to undergrad, was about to shut down the only abortion clinic that existed in that entire state. So Missouri is currently one of 6 states that has a single abortion clinic left in the entire state. We would always, drive by it, see it covered in hordes of extremely, vitriolic protesters yelling the most hateful things as patients as they just tried to get medical care. Knowing that many of those patients had traveled from hundreds of miles away just to get there. And in overcoming all of these barriers to access, we're incurring hundreds of dollars in completely avoidable expenses. But, at least that clinic existed. That summer, it was, the state was going to refuse to renew its license, and Missouri would become the first state since Roe v. Wade to have no abortion access whatsoever.
Oh my gosh.
This was a completely dystopian possibility that might be the case anywhere in 2019. And simultaneously, we were seeing a lot of tech companies on the men's sexual wellness side starting to gain a lot of traction and really do a good job increasing access to those stigmatized goods. So started thinking if that's a model that could be applied to, safe, discreet, affordable medication abortion access.
It's fascinating and also shocking that it doesn't exist, but as prevalently as men's care, but I'm glad that you are doing it. So I want to learn more, and I know everyone else does too. So we'll kind of get into a bit of the details. But I wanted to share with everyone, you kind of just alluded to it, but I wanted to share some stats with everyone that you guys that shared with me in advance that just blew me away. So, most of us are probably aware of the Roe v. Wade decision, which guaranteed women's access to abortion. But, we know the story doesn't end there, and there's still so many barriers. So you guys told me 1 in 4 women in this country will have an abortion, but 90% of counties in this country don't have a clinic. Like that's insane, first of all. 84% of the clinics that do exist report harassment, and there's a ton of unnecessary exorbitant costs that make safe abortions inaccessible to many women. So it sends them into, they're not going to just not have an abortion. So they're usually going to go and do something that's far more dangerous. So what are some of the actual ways that Hey Jane is addressing these issues?
Yeah, so our model is to allow patients to access care from the comfort of their home or wherever they choose. They could come onto our site, get a ton of additional information about who we are, what medication abortion is. Many people don't even know it's possible to have an abortion just through a pill. And of course, how treatment would work through telemedicine. They'll be able to book a consult with the provider, and if they're medically eligible, they'll get the pills sent directly to their home. For some context, this is very similar to the way it works today in that patients are self-managing their care from home, but in order to just access the pills, they're going through all those barriers that we discussed. So driving hundreds of miles, walking through protesters, metal detectors, etc. We cut all of that out and allow the patient to get sort of holistic, low stigma care that's also highly affordable from wherever they choose.
Yeah, so what is the abortion pill exactly?
Great question. Okay, so the abortion pill is a bit of a misnomer. It's actually a combination of two different medications, misoprostol and mifepristone. You don't need to remember those, but just for info. They are extremely effective, FDA approved in the US since 2000, so very well understood. 98% effective at ending unintended pregnancies up to 11 weeks. And they are insanely safe. They have an adverse reaction rate of 0.1%, which is 7 times lower than Viagra, which is of course very popular in telemedicine now. It's actually a lower serious adverse reaction rate than Tylenol.
Wow. I read that it's safer than Viagra, and I just find it so ironic, frustrating, annoying that, you know, it's super easy for men to go make babies, but then now, like, we're stuck with the problem.
It is ridiculous.
But no, it shows there really is such a stigma around women's health, and it's frustrating that it's treated in a kind of a totally different dimension. There's all of these ideological feelings and whatnot that the society puts onto women's health, but they don't put the same thing onto men's health, and it's just this double standard. And I love something I read about Hey Jane, how you guys said, and if I misquote you, please correct me, but you said something like, you know, we're not, reproductive care is not an ideological issue. It's just a health issue. As simple as that. Like, if you need this care, you should be able, and you want it, you should be able to get it. We're not forcing any agenda. I love that.
Absolutely right. If it's a medical treatment that 1 in 4 women are getting, it's very clear that it's common and needs to be handled safely within, you know, a mainstream system of care. It is absolutely ridiculous that all of these barriers are put into place under the guise of patient safety, but really actually make it significantly less safe by forcing people to delay care or seeking it in, you know, potentially unsafe ways.
Yeah. So how does this work nationally? Because obviously states have different laws. How are you kind of addressing that and trying to give access to as many women as you can?
Very good question, and it does get somewhat complicated.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So for now, abortion is federally legal under Roe v. Wade. We've unfortunately started to see some challenges to that arrive with the new Supreme Court composition, but for now it is still federally protected. That said, many states have rolled out pretty creative ways to block access through various methods, both in person and through telemedicine. There are currently 19 states that have laws on the books that would preemptively ban telemedicine abortion, despite significant evidence that it's just as safe and just as effective as in-person care. We will start by focusing on the states where, you know, there is less of that regulatory friction to get started faster. This is an urgent need that needs to be met now, and also try to build up some of that comfort and reputational credibility so that as we expand to some states that may be a little bit more nervous about it, we have a long history of, you know, safe, effective, and patient-approved care.
Right. That's really interesting. I did a video 2 weeks ago, I think, about I'm sure some people watching this would have seen it, about the Arkansas bill that passed recently, and how it's a strategic play because they know that these really crazy excessive bills, like, you know, banning abortion, even in the case of rape or incest, that is going to be challenged by activists. And that's kind of the whole point, which is to get in front of the Supreme Court and challenge Roe v. Wade. How serious is the threat to Roe v. Wade, or how do abortion activists see, you know, these ongoing challenges?
I would personally consider it extremely serious.
There's the sweater. Sorry, I was asking you. So we'll talk about the sweater after. But this is important. Yes. Sorry.
No problem at all. It's, you know, there have been a number of attempts now to create laws that the states know are in complete violation of Roe v. Wade, which is, you know, a federal mandate. They're doing so with the explicit intent to try to overturn this existing protection to healthcare. We, have had some significant changes in who is on the Supreme Court recently, unfortunately. And I think it's yet to be determined how they will respond to some of these cases. But if we do look at their backgrounds and some of the initial signals we've got, it doesn't look great. So I think that this is a really urgent issue that people should be engaging local politicians on, so that we aren't letting the courts decide. It really should be up to the people, and the majority of Americans do support safe access to abortion.
Yeah, and that's a critical thing that is sometimes overlooked. Guys, we actually have more power than we realize. The states are really what's going to determine these federal issues, and we can call our senators, we can petition them, we can tweet at them, like we can do a ton of things to our representatives who represent us. And then we also have to vote in the midterms, and we have to vote in our local elections. Like, all of these things matter. And speaking of the Supreme Court, that's a good segue to my sweater, my personal icon. These adorable sweaters are by Hey Jane. Do you want to talk about the sweaters, Kiki? Because RBG is like my hero.
We're all same. She's
love
actually
her.
been in both of our merch launches. So we partner as Hey Jane with a really cool nonprofit called ReproCare. It's a digital abortion fund. So they help us give subsidized treatments to anyone who can't afford it. So to help fundraise for that fund, for International Women's Day, we launched some pretty cool merch with some of our favorite women on it, including RBG, as shown on Natalia's sweater. And this is actually one of our older pieces of merch, which is a Kamala quote.
You guys have the cutest merch. I love your shop. It doesn't feel like, like an activism shop even. It just feels like a store where I would buy things that I want.
Thank
so
you.
It's like a double win. Yeah, it's not merch. It's really great.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I love it.
Try to make it cute.
Yeah, you guys. So go check out their website. You guys have RBG, Serena Williams.
We have AOC,
Gloria Steinem,
and Gloria Steinem. The Gloria Steinem's the bestseller. And AOC was the final.
Of course, another icon, right?
Absolutely.
So I imagine that just getting this off the ground must have been a really massive undertaking and controversial as well, even still probably talking about it. And I seriously admire you so much for taking this on. I think it must take a lot of courage as well as knowledge, but courage probably more so. So I'm curious, like, what some of the biggest challenges that you faced kind of making this, bringing this to vision to life?
Yeah, really good question. I think launching any startup is really hard. So we had all of those layered on with just like what is the inevitable political complexity of this topic. So I won't call any vendors out or anything, but there are a number of like pretty ludicrous restrictions on advertising, even if it just instantly touches abortion, which is again another point where we would reference this is healthcare, but it's treated completely differently. We've seen other folks like our payment processor randomly shut us off because they felt that it was inappropriate. So certainly some extra hiccups. And then of course there are just, concerns about safety of the team and harassment and all of those issues.
Really?
We've seen it minimally so far, but of course want to make sure that given, experiences that many providers go through in this space, that everyone is protected.
Wow, that's great. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So how big is your team right now?
We are small and mighty. There are 5 of us.
Yeah. Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
How exciting. I wanted to also ask you on a personal note, speaking of RBG, you went to Harvard Business School, and that's where RBG went to Harvard Law School. And for those of you who've seen her documentary, if you haven't, you should totally watch it. But she was one of 9 women in the class of over 500. So, I mean, those women, the women of that generation just really, really paved the way for you and me and all the things that we're able to do. She often said that she would be so afraid to speak up in class because whenever she spoke, she felt like she was representing all women. And that's just such a crazy, unnecessary type of pressure. And I wanted to know your experience. I obviously didn't go to Harvard, but what was your experience? I went to USC, still great. But
Fantastic.
just because of the direct contrast of like the 9 women versus now,
Yes.
is it more balanced? And what was your experience? What do you think has changed since then? And where do you think we still need to go?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. And I have to say, I think a lot has changed and progressed in the right direction. I think the class now is about 40% women. Of course, I'd like to see it 50-50 or even more women, but meaningful progress since, 9. Um,
Yeah.
there are, I'm torn on this because I do think that there's a lot of things they could do to be significantly more inclusive. And there does seem to be attention on it. The year before I started, there was a big overhaul of some of the more subtle ways in which the classes were structured to encourage more participation of, women and other underrepresented minorities. This was actually pretty fascinating given the anecdote you mentioned about RBG. This is kind of niche, but you get graded on participation in class. That's essentially how we're scored. When I was at HBS, they had scribes that wrote down everyone's comments so that there was an exact record of who spoke.
Wow.
They found that after they did that, the grades for women went up significantly because prior, women were, presumably speaking up just as often, but the teachers weren't remembering it. They were associating, the comments with more vocal, boisterous men. And so some of these really, what seem like small changes can end up having these like really massive impacts. It's fascinating once you sort of really dig in.
That's insane that they just because of the documentation and how you remember things. I've heard similar conversations actually when it comes to culture and how we view things that are good and things that are bad through our own kind of cultural lens.
Yeah.
And that has impacted, I'm sure you've heard about these stories as well, like being at HBS, but with like global business, we really in American culture praise the outspoken, dominant, and like loud people who always have something to say. There are other cultures, I was listening to this one, like a cultural expert, and I can't remember her name right now, but she said, like French people are like, why do Americans always speak? It's like they have nothing to say. Like, I'm not going to just talk if I have nothing important to say. A lot of Asian cultures have a completely different relationship to authority and how they express themselves and what they view as positive. And so it's so, even that participation grade that you said, that's so simple that we just take for granted is really not necessarily a given, and it's not how everyone should be ranked. It's just crazy when you think about it that way.
It really is. I could go on and on about this. But certainly having participation and just frequency of vocalizing an opinion, whether or not it's a good opinion, and having that be the primary metric.
Yeah, they say it's a very American thing to be like, just to reiterate, you're in a meeting, you just so that you say something, you just like repeat what someone just said.
Exactly. Yeah. Building off of what Natalia said. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Side note. But back to the other very important stuff. That was actually one of my questions, like an interesting story. So we covered that. What do you see right now as kind of, we covered this a bit with the Supreme Court, but beyond that, even just on the day-to-day levels, like what are some of the biggest threats right now to women's reproductive rights, and how is Hey Jane addressing them, and what can we do as well as individuals to move this forward?
Yeah. Maybe I will actually start with some good news, because I think that over the past couple months, there's been some really good tailwinds in the direction that we want to see after, what were 4 pretty bleak years on the topic. So I will give a shout out. Last week, a man named Javier Becerra was confirmed as our head of Human Health Services. He could not be a better ally for this cause. At the beginning of COVID, he actually started a petition about telemedicine abortion access in particular, and got 21 other attorneys general to sign it. All of this is to say there's a lot of bad stuff happening in the news about this, but there are bright spots, and I think we should focus on those to figure out, how we can really leverage that momentum and keep it going. I'm of course biased, but I do think as states do move to put further insane, completely unsafe restrictions on abortion access, things like telemedicine and alternative forms of access do become especially critical. with something like telemedicine, whether through Hey Jane or any other service, patients will now be able to access care at a sort of post office, through a mailbox at the border of their state into, an adjacent state that may have more sensible regulations. So I think coming up with creative and innovative ways to get around some of these crazy state level restrictions is really key. That said, Roe v. Wade is completely under attack right now. I think that federal protections will likely go away if we don't intervene soon. And what that will mean, I think there's a common misperception of Roe v. Wade that if it goes away, abortion is illegal now across the country. That's not true. What it will do is just exacerbate the inequality in access between states now. We're both in California. For us, nothing will change. And if anything, it may even become easier to get, access to safe abortion care. But in the states that are already heavily restricted, it will get, much worse, if not completely impossible, to get care. We haven't gone into what, I think there's just the inherent rights value for why abortion access is so critical, but there's also really measurable mental and physical health outcomes that, result from being turned away from care that you're seeking. And increased anxiety, increased tethering to abusive partners, let alone, the detrimental effects on existing children that you may have in your household. So all of this to say, it's a big issue. We need to do something about it now. Write to your local politicians if you live in one of those states.
Yeah, and that's a good point that we haven't touched on much yet. You and I are clearly coming from the same, position that let women make their own decisions for themselves. But make the case for why you think that choice is important. What are some of the arguments that you hear against it, and what would your response be to people who disagree with you?
Yeah. Listen, it's a very complex topic. A lot of it is rooted in things that are just impossible to argue from a logic-based lens. And so I will try to avoid those. I will say that I think, bodily autonomy is really critical to any form of freedom, and every single person should be entitled to that. But the real fact of the matter is that making abortion illegal or harder to get doesn't prevent abortions. It just makes people get unsafe abortions. And so if you truly do care about health, there's really no argument that would support restricting this type of care. I was just referencing some data from a really fantastic study that anyone listening should Google if they're interested. It's called the Turnaway Study. They basically...
Okay. I'm going to include, I'll include all of that in the web page that I share after this talk with the video. So all these resources, don't worry guys, I'm going to have all of Kaitlin's links. Anyway, sorry, continue.
Cool. So this study was fascinating. It took place over the course of many years, and they basically looked at outcomes for patients who were at the cutoff point for being able to access abortion care. So they looked at the differences from people who got the care and who were 1 or 2 days later and so turned away, but otherwise completely comparable. They found for that later group, the people who were turned away had significantly higher rates of anxiety and other mental health issues, significantly higher likelihood of remaining in a abusive relationship, significantly worse educational and economic outcomes for their household, including 50% of abortion patients already have a kid that they need to support. The data on this is really clear on essentially every single level. Restricting access to care is unsafe and just unethical.
Yeah. I rarely, I cannot think of another time, maybe HR1, okay, maybe one other time, that I have actually come out and given my opinion on something and been very vocal and adamant about how I feel. I try to be as neutral as possible, but when it comes to women's health and reproductive care, I just think the government should stay out. They have no place in this conversation. Leave it to the health providers, which is what you guys are really focusing on. You're saying this is a health issue, and it's a personal issue. So I am so grateful for all of the work that you're doing. I love Hey Jane. I think you guys like on the side, like side note to all of the amazing work you're doing. You have the most, like I said, amazing products, the most beautiful website. Your Instagram just gives great information. I just think like you're such a fabulous, modern, important company, and I just like can't wait to see you guys grow and take over. And I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you so much.
I'm gonna, before we go, I wanted to see if there are any questions that we haven't covered related to this conversation, not related to what my OnlyFans account is. I do not have one. Nope. So I think we've answered all of these questions. So is there anything that I didn't ask you that you think it's important for everyone to know?
I think we covered a lot.
Yeah. And I see Gabby, who's your colleague, has been here answering a lot of people's questions as well, which is awesome. Thank you so much. So yeah, I'm going to share this video and all of your resources. Guys, go check out Hey Jane, their Instagram account, their website, check out their amazing merch, get educated, see what your options are, learn about these issues, and contact your reps if Roe v. Wade is something you want to support. Anything else? Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Really thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Gabby. And we'll speak soon. Thanks everyone for tuning in.